My dear weary soul, it's me, Jesus, and I'm here with you in this sacred moment of the night. I know you've come to this place carrying the weight of the day on your shoulders, perhaps with a restless heart and a mind full of thoughts that won't let you find the rest you so desperately need. I want you to know that it's no accident you're hearing my voice right now. I've prepared this special moment for just the two of us, where time stands still and true peace can finally touch your soul. This isn't just another day coming to an end, but an invitation for you to experience the rest that only I can offer tonight. I'm going to tell you a very special story, the story of a divine clock that has the power to stop time so that my children can find true rest. It's a story born from my infinite love for you, a narrative woven with threads of tenderness and compassion that will wrap around your heart like a soft, welcoming blanket. You don't need to carry anything alone anymore. Tonight, I'm taking on all your burdens, all your worries, all the anxieties that keep you from peaceful sleep. Let my presence surround you like a gentle breeze, bringing the healing your soul so desperately needs. Breathe with me now, slowly and deeply. Feel how my peace begins to descend upon you like morning dew on a thirsty garden. This story I'm about to share isn't just to help your body fall asleep, but to awaken your soul to the most precious truth. You are deeply loved, completely accepted, and eternally cared for by me. As you settle in comfortably, know that every word I'm about to speak has been chosen especially for you, like a gentle melody composed by the Father himself to comfort his children. Let your mind quiet down, let your heart find peace. For tonight you will sleep cradled by my unconditional love. This is our sacred hour, where the world outside loses its urgency and there exists only you, me, and this love story that will heal the deepest wounds of your soul and bring the rest your spirit cries out for. Once upon a time, in the days when I walked the earth in flesh and blood, I met a man named Simon. He wasn't the Peter you know, but another Simon, a clockmaker from the small town of Nain. His hands, calloused from constant work, knew every gear, every hand, every tick-tock that marked the relentless passage of time. Simon was tormented by insomnia, night after night. He would lie awake in his small workshop, surrounded by the deafening sound of dozens of clocks that never stopped marking the seconds. Time, which was his profession, had become his curse. Each tick-tock echoed in his mind like a water drop falling incessantly, reminding him of everything he couldn't control. At that time, I was passing through Nain when I heard the sound of clocks coming from his workshop. But it wasn't just the clocks I was hearing. It was the silent cry of a soul in despair, the lament of a heart that couldn't find peace. Like a shepherd who knows the bleat of each sheep, I immediately recognized the sound of someone who needed me. It was very late at night when I knocked on his workshop door. Simon opened it, surprised to receive a visitor at that hour. His eyes were red from exhaustion, his face marked by sleepless nights. When he saw me, something inside him quieted for the first time in months. "Master," he whispered, though he had never seen me before, "did you come because you heard my clocks?" I smiled tenderly and replied, "No, Simon, I came because I heard your heart." We entered the workshop together, where dozens of clocks of every shape and size marked time in a deafening symphony. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound was hypnotic, but in a way that caused anguish rather than comfort. "Master," said Simon, with tears in his eyes, "I'm a clockmaker who can't sleep." Ironic, don't you think? I spend all day adjusting time for others, but I can't find the right time for my own rest. Every sound from these clocks reminds me of Another lost second, another sleepless night, another day that will begin without me having rested. I placed my hand on his shoulder and felt all the tension accumulated there. It was like touching a violin string stretched to its maximum, about to break. "Simon," I said gently, "you know well the time of men, but you don't yet know the time of God." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. I raised my right hand and, with a gentle movement, all the clocks in the workshop stopped at the same time. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of the Father's presence. It was a silence that embraced, that healed, that calmed. Simon looked at me in amazement. "How?" he began to ask, but I gently interrupted him. "In God's time," I explained, "there exists a sacred moment where everything stops so that his children can find peace. This is the moment of true rest, where the soul no longer needs to race against the clock, but can simply be." There, in that sacred silence, Simon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The complete absence of anxiety. His heart, which had been racing like the hands of his clocks, finally found its natural rhythm, synchronized with the pulse of divine love. "Tonight," I told him, "you're going to sleep like a child in his mother's arms. And when you wake up, you'll understand the secret I'm going to teach you. There's a special clock that only works when all the others stop." With these words, I guided Simon to a comfortable chair in his workshop. He sat down and, for the first time in months, his eyes began to grow heavy. The silence of the stopped clocks had become the most beautiful lullaby he had ever heard. And just as Simon found peace in the sacred silence, you too can feel this same tranquility descending upon you now. Let time stop for you as well, my dear soul. When Simon awakened the next morning, something had changed profoundly in his being. For the first time in months, he had slept deeply, without nightmares, without the familiar anguish of insomnia. But what was most impressive was that, despite all the workshop clocks being stopped, he knew exactly what time it was. Not through hands or numbers, but through an inner perception he had never experienced before. I was there when he woke up, sitting in a nearby chair, watching him with the affection of a father watching over his child's sleep. "Good morning, Simon," I said softly. "How do you feel?" He stretched slowly, with a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Master, it's the first time in years that I feel truly rested. But how is it possible? All my clocks are stopped, and yet I know it's 6 in the morning." "Ah, my dear Simon," I replied, "it's because you've finally discovered the invisible clock, the one that marks not the seconds that pass, but the moments that really matter. This clock isn't on your walls, but in your heart. It doesn't measure time, it measures love." I stood up and began walking through the workshop, gently touching each stopped clock. "You see, all these clocks measure chronological time, chronos, as the Greeks will say in the future. But there's another kind of time, which we call kairos, the opportune time, the right moment, God's time. It's in this time that miracles happen. It's in this time that healing comes. It's in this time that true rest is found." Simon approached me, his eyes shining with renewed curiosity. "But Master, how can I live in the world of men, which is always running, always in a hurry, always measuring every second, if I now know this other time?" I smiled and placed my hand on one of the stopped clocks. Immediately, it started working again, but now its tick-tock sounded different, softer, more melodious, almost like a whispered prayer. "The secret, Simon, isn't to live outside of men's time, but to carry God's time within yourself. Imagine I continued, that you have two clocks. One is visible to everyone. It's the one that marks your appointments, your responsibilities, your obligations, but the other is invisible, sacred, personal. This inner clock marks the moments of communion with me, the instants of gratitude, the seconds of genuine love, the minutes of true peace. I walked to the workshop window, from where you could see the morning movement of the city. People were running back and forth, all trapped by the tyranny of their own clocks. Do you see those people out there? They live only in chronological time. That's why they're always tired, always anxious, always feeling like time isn't enough. But you, now that you know the invisible clock, can walk among them carrying the peace that comes from knowing there's a greater time, a greater purpose, a greater love governing every moment. Simon joined me at the window. But Master, how can I help other people discover this clock? Ah, that's the most important question you could ask, I replied, touching his shoulder tenderly. Every clock you repair from now on will be more than a simple time marker. It will be a reminder that there's a time for everything under heaven, a time to work and a time to rest, a time to worry and a time to trust, a time to run and a time to stop. We returned to the center of the workshop, where I began touching other clocks, bringing them back to life, but now each with its own harmonious rhythm. When someone brings you a broken clock to repair, remember that maybe it's not just the clock that needs healing. Maybe it's the person who carries it. You can offer more than a repair. You can offer a word of peace, a moment of understanding, a reflection of the love I have for each of my children. And on nights when insomnia wants to return, I continued, remember the invisible clock. Close your eyes, place your hand on your heart, and listen not to the tick-tock of the clocks on the wall, but to the gentle pulse of eternal love that never stops, never gets tired, never forgets about you. Simon nodded deeply, understanding that he had received more than one night of restorative sleep. He had received a new way of living. Master, he said, can I ask a question? This invisible clock, does it work for everyone? Even for those who are very hurt, very tired, very lost? I looked into his eyes, and in that look, he could see all the depth of my love for humanity, especially for those, Simon. The invisible clock was created exactly for those who have lost hope in men's time, for those who feel that life went by too fast or too slow, for those who can't find peace in the world's rush, for those whose hearts beat out of sync with anxiety and fear. At that moment, something extraordinary happened again. All the workshop clocks began to play a soft and harmonious melody, like a heavenly choir, marking not just the passage of time, but celebrating the eternity of love that never ends. Feel, now, my dear soul, how your own invisible clock begins to pulse in harmony with my heart. Let this divine rhythm cradle your thoughts and prepare your spirit for the rest that is to come. In the days following our encounter, Simon's workshop transformed into something much deeper than a simple clock repair shop. Word about his new way of working began to spread throughout the city of Nain and the neighboring villages. People came, not just to fix their clocks, but in search of something they couldn't even define themselves, a peace that seemed to emanate from that place. I returned frequently to visit Simon, sometimes during the day to observe his work, sometimes at night to continue our conversations about the mysteries of divine time. It was during one of these nighttime visits that we witnessed something that would forever change how he saw his mission. It was a particularly cold night, when an elderly woman named Martha arrived at the workshop. She carried an old clock, a family heirloom that had stopped working the week before. But anyone with spiritual discernment could see that it wasn't just the clock that was broken, it was her heart. "Master Simon," she said with a trembling voice, "this clock belonged to my late husband. It was all I had left of him. When it stopped working, I felt like he had died again. I know it might seem silly, but—" Simon gently interrupted her, exactly as I had done with him that first night. "It's not silly, Mrs. Martha. Time carries our memories, our loves, our longings. Let me see what I can do." While Simon examined the clock with his magnifying glasses and tools, I approached Martha. Although she couldn't see me physically at that moment, her soul felt my presence. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and a tear of relief rolled down her face. "Mrs. Martha," said Simon while working, "may I tell you a story I learned recently? It's about a special kind of clock that marks not just the hours that pass, but the moments of love that stay forever." She nodded, eager for any word that could bring comfort to her grieving heart. "A few days ago," Simon began, "I learned that there's an invisible clock inside each of us. This clock doesn't stop when someone we love departs from this life. Actually, it begins to mark something even more precious, the eternity of the love we shared." As he spoke, his hands worked with an almost supernatural delicacy on the old clock's mechanism. Each movement seemed to be guided by wisdom that came from beyond his own experience. "You see," he continued, "when your husband was alive, you shared chronological time, the minutes, hours, days together. But now, you share something much deeper, the time of eternal love, where there's no real separation, just a temporary pause until the reunion." Martha wiped her eyes with an already damp handkerchief. "But how can I feel this? How can I be sure he's still with me somehow?" It was then that I whispered in Simon's ear the words he should speak. He stopped his work for a moment and looked directly into the afflicted woman's eyes. "Mrs. Martha, when you feel a gentle breeze touch your face for no apparent reason, when you find a coin on the ground exactly when you're thinking of him, when a bird sings at your window on your wedding anniversary, those are the tick of the invisible clock, reminding you that true love never dies, it just changes form." At that moment, something miraculous happened. The old clock came to life in Simon's hands, but it didn't just start working again. It emitted a sound that Martha recognized immediately. It was exactly the same rhythm as her husband's breathing, when he slept beside her for so many years. She brought her hands to her heart and smiled through her tears. "It's him," she whispered. "It's like he's telling me he's okay, that I can find peace." Simon smiled and returned the clock to her, but first said, "Take this clock back home, and every time you hear its tick-tock, remember that it's the sound of eternal love beating in sync with your heart. And when the longing becomes too strong, when insomnia comes because of the pain of absence, close your eyes and listen not just to this clock, but to the invisible clock within you, which marks the moments when love transcends even death." After Martha left, visibly transformed, Simon turned to me. "Master, what happened here tonight was more than a clock repair, wasn't it?" "Much more, my dear Simon," I replied. "You just experienced what happens when chronological time meets eternal time, when we use our earthly skills, like your expertise in fixing clocks, as instruments of divine love. Miracles of healing happen." We walked together to the window, from where we could see Martha walking away down the street, pressing the clock against her chest as if it were her husband's own heart. "From now on," I continued, "your workshop will become a place where weary hearts find rest. People will come here carrying much more than broken clocks. They'll bring shattered dreams, lost hopes, sleepless nights, souls wounded by time's relentless passage. And how can I help all of them? Asked Simon, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the joy of the mission. The same way you helped. Martha, I replied, by listening with your heart, working with love, and always remembering that behind every broken clock there's a person who needs to rediscover that there's a greater time, a greater purpose, a greater love, caring for every detail of their life. That night, before leaving, I blessed Simon's workshop in a special way. I touched every tool, every clock, every corner of that simple place, imbuing everything with a special anointing for healing weary hearts. This workshop, I told him, will be known throughout the kingdom as the place where time stops so souls can find rest. And you, Simon, will be remembered not just as the clockmaker who fixed timekeeping machines, but as the man who helped people discover God's time. And so it was. In the months that followed, people from all parts came looking for Simon. Some brought clocks, others just hearts in need of healing. He had learned to see beyond hands and gears, perceiving the deepest needs of every soul that crossed his door. Feel how you too can find this sacred workshop within your own heart, where I'm always available to fix what's broken and wind up the clock of your hope. A few weeks after the encounter with Martha, a young shepherd named John arrived at Simon's workshop. Unlike the others who came seeking repairs for their clocks, John arrived empty-handed, but carrying in his eyes the weight of night after night without sleep. "Master Simon," he said with an exhausted voice, "I've heard that you know secrets about time that others don't. I come to you because I don't know what else to do. For months I haven't been able to sleep a full night. I stay awake, caring for the flock, not just during the day, but also during the night, because my mind won't rest." I was present at that moment, invisible to John's physical eyes, but my heart was deeply moved by him. I recognized in that young shepherd the same kind of anguish that had tormented Simon, but with an additional layer of responsibility. He felt he couldn't rest because other lives depended on his vigilance. Simon invited John to sit and offered him a glass of fresh water. "Tell me about your nights," he said gently. "What happens when you try to sleep?" John sighed deeply. "It's like my mind is a clock that can't stop working. I keep thinking about the sheep. Are they safe? What if a wolf comes during the night? What if one of them gets lost? What if I fall asleep and something terrible happens? The more I think about it, the more awake I become. It's a cycle I can't break." Simon nodded understandingly. During his own sleepless nights, he had experienced exactly the same kind of racing. Mind, like a broken clock that couldn't find its natural rhythm. "John," said Simon, "can I show you something very special? A few weeks ago, I learned about a type of clock that has the power to cure insomnia. But this clock is different from all the others I've ever seen." John leaned forward, interested. Any hope of finding rest was worth exploring. Simon stood up and walked to a shelf where he kept his most special clocks. But instead of taking a physical clock, he returned with empty hands. "The clock that will cure your insomnia, John, isn't here in my workshop. It's inside you, waiting to be discovered." "I don't understand," said John, confused. It was then that I whispered in Simon's ear the words he needed to hear. "John," said Simon, "you know Psalm 23 well, don't you? The Lord is my shepherd, ... Single quotes, of course," replied John. "It's one of my favorites." "Then recite with me, 'The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters, ... Single quotes. Simon paused meaningfully. John, do you realize the irony? You're a shepherd who cares for sheep, but you've forgotten that you're also a sheep who needs care. The words hit John like a revelation. He had spent so much time worrying about being the perfect shepherd that he had forgotten he himself needed a shepherd. The invisible clock that will cure your insomnia, continued Simon, works like this. Instead of counting minutes of worry, you're going to learn to count breaths of trust. Instead of marking the time of your anxieties, you're going to mark the time of God's presence with you. Simon guided John to a comfortable chair in the corner of the workshop. Now, close your eyes and imagine that you're in green pastures, exactly as the psalm describes. But this time, you're not the shepherd, you're one of the sheep. John closed his eyes and, for the first time in months, allowed his shoulders to relax. Listen to the sound of the Supreme Shepherd's breathing, continued Simon, following my guidance. It's a sound more constant than any clock, more reliable than any chronometer. Tick, dot dot dot, tock, dot dot, tock, dot dot, tock, dot. But this isn't the sound of anxiety, it's the sound of constant protection. As Simon spoke, I placed my hands on John's shoulders, and immediately he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. His breathing began to synchronize with a slower, deeper rhythm. Now, said Simon, I want you to imagine a very special clock. This clock doesn't have hands that run frantically. Instead, it has a single, gentle light that pulses softly, marking not the seconds that pass, but the moments when you're safe. In the arms of the eternal shepherd, John felt tears streaming down his closed face. It was as if an extremely tight string inside him was finally being loosened. All your sheep are safe, continued Simon, because the same shepherd who cares for you is caring for them. When you rest, you're not abandoning your responsibility, you're demonstrating trust in the Supreme Shepherd who never sleeps, never dozes, never gets tired of watching. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. John, who had spent months unable to sleep, simply fell asleep right there, in the chair in Simon's workshop. But it wasn't restless or worried sleep. It was the deep, restorative sleep of a child who knows he's completely safe. Simon and I stayed there, watching over John's sleep like shepherds, caring for a wounded sheep that had finally found rest. For 2 hours, he slept deeply, and when he woke up, his eyes shone with a light that hadn't been there for months. I slept, he said, almost incredulously. I really slept, and I dreamed, ... I dreamed I was in an immense pasture with all my sheep, but there was a greater shepherd caring for all of us. I woke up knowing that my sheep are safe, even when I sleep. Simon smiled and said, the invisible clock that cures insomnia doesn't mark hours of worry, John. It marks moments of trust. And now you've learned its secret. Before leaving, John asked, how can I take this clock home with me? It's simple, replied Simon. Every night before going to bed, place your hand on your heart and remember, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down, ... Single quotes, let these words be the tick-tock of your invisible clock, marking not the time of anxiety, but the time of peace that comes from knowing you're a sheep loved by a shepherd who never sleeps. And you, my dear sheep, can also hear now the pulse of this invisible clock in your own heart, marking the moments of peace that I have reserved especially for you. As the months passed, Simon's workshop became famous not only for his skill in repairing clocks, but mainly for his ability to bring peace to tormented souls. People arrived carrying not just broken timepieces, but shattered hearts, and they invariably left with something far more valuable than a working clock. They left with the discovery that there was a divine time operating in their lives. It was on a rainy afternoon that a woman named Anna arrived at the workshop. She brought with her a very old wall clock, but anyone with spiritual sensitivity could perceive that her wound went far beyond any broken mechanism. "Master Simon," she said with a voice choked with emotion, "this clock belonged to my mother. She died 3 years ago, and since then I've been carrying a terrible guilt. I wasn't present when she passed away. I was taking care of my own business, thinking I would have more time with her. The clock stopped exactly at the hour she died, and I could never forgive myself for not being there. I felt the deep pain that emanated from Anna's heart. It was a wound that chronological time had not been able to heal. In fact, each passing day seemed to deepen her guilt and remorse. I approached her, enveloping her with my comforting presence, though she could not see me physically. Simon received the clock with reverence, like one who receives something sacred. "Anna," he said gently, "may I ask what your mother most loved to do with you when she was alive?" Anna smiled sadly through her tears. "She loved for us to sit together at the end of the afternoon, having tea and talking about everything and nothing. She always said those were the most precious moments of her day. But in the last months of her life, I was always too busy, always in a hurry, always promising that next week we would have more time. And now you feel you lost forever the opportunity to have those moments with her?" asked Simon, while carefully examining the stopped mechanism of the clock. "Exactly," Anna sighed. "Time ran out, and I wasted it. How can I forgive myself for having wasted the last moments with her?" It was then that I whispered in Simon's heart the words that Anna needed to hear. He stopped his work and looked directly into her eyes. "Anna, let me tell you something about time that I learned recently. There is the time we measure with clocks, and there is the time we measure with love. And the time of love never ends, never gets wasted, never is completely lost." Anna frowned, not fully understanding. "You see," Simon continued, "when you sit now to have tea alone and remember your mother, what time is that? When you smile, remembering a conversation you had years ago, what time is that? When you do something you know she would approve of and feel her presence somehow, what time is that?" Anna's eyes began to shine with growing understanding. "It's the time of eternal love," said Simon. "A time that cannot be measured by hands or numbers. A time that doesn't end when the heart stops beating. A time that isn't wasted even when we think it has passed." He returned to work on the clock, but continued speaking. "Your mother didn't measure her love for you by the minutes you spent together in her final days. She measured it by the entire time you shared a life together, and that time, Anna, cannot be lost or wasted, because it was engraved not on clock hands, but in her heart and in yours." While Simon worked, something miraculous began to happen. The clock, which had remained silent for 3 years, began to emit a very soft tick-tock, almost like a whisper. "Listen," said Simon, stopping to hear. "This isn't just the sound of a mechanism coming back to life. It's the sound of the time of love, which never really stopped. Your mother didn't measure the final moments of her life by the clocks on the wall, Anna. She measured them by the years of love you built together." Anna placed her hands over her chest, feeling her heart beat in sync with the newly repaired clock. "But I still feel like I failed her, ... Anna," said Simon gently, "following my guidance, if your mother were here now, what would she say about this guilt you carry?" Anna closed her eyes, and, for a moment, it was as if she could hear her mother's voice. She ... She would tell me to stop blaming myself. She always said that what mattered wasn't the amount of time we spent together, but the love we shared in each moment. Then, said Simon, perhaps it's time for you to start measuring time as your mother measured it, not by the minutes you weren't present, but by the years of love you had together. At that moment, the clock gave a soft chime, as if it were agreeing. Anna looked at it in amazement. This clock, said Simon, will now mark not just the hours that pass, but the moments when you allow yourself to feel your mother's love still alive in your heart. Each tick-tock will be a reminder that true love transcends even death, and that you didn't lose time with her, you gained eternity together. Anna hugged the clock against her chest, and for the first time in 3 years, felt peace instead of guilt. How can I take this peace home with me? Every time you hear this clock, Simon replied, remember that there is an invisible clock inside you that doesn't mark the lost moments, but the eternal moments. And when guilt tries to return, close your eyes and listen not just to this physical clock, but to the clock of the heart, which beats with the rhythm of love that never dies. Before Aina left, she turned to Simon one last time. Master, how can I thank you for giving me back not just my clock, but my peace? Simon smiled with the same tenderness he had learned from me. Live each day knowing that the most important time isn't what you can see on the clock, but what you feel in your heart. And when you meet other people carrying guilt similar to yours, share with them the secret of the invisible clock. As Anna walked away down the rainy street, carrying her repaired clock and her healed heart, I placed my hand on Simon's shoulder. You are learning, my dear friend, I said to him. Each person who crosses your door brings with them a different kind of temporal wound. Some feel that time passed too quickly, others that it passed too slowly. Some feel they wasted time, others that they didn't have enough time. But for each temporal wound, there is an aspect of the invisible clock that can bring healing. Feel now how the invisible clock within you can also heal the wounds left by time, transforming each regret into gratitude, each guilt into renewed love. As autumn arrived in Nain, Simon's workshop had become much more than a place of repairs. It was a sanctuary where wounded souls found the balm of divine peace. I continued visiting regularly, sometimes visible only to Simon, other times manifesting my presence in ways that touched each visitor's heart in a unique and personal manner. It was on one of those golden autumn afternoons that an elderly man named Benjamin arrived at the workshop. Unlike the others who came seeking help, Benjamin seemed to radiate a deep peace, but his eyes revealed a weariness that went beyond age. It was the weariness of a soul that had carried many burdens for many years. Master Simon, he said with a soft but firm voice, I don't come here to fix a clock. Actually, I come because I feel that my own time on this earth is approaching its end. And I would like to learn about this invisible clock that everyone in the city talks about. I want to leave this life knowing that I'm leaving my children and grandchildren something more valuable than material inheritance. Simon received Benjamin with special reverence, for he recognized in him the wisdom that comes from a life well lived. I also drew near, for I knew this encounter would be different from the others. It wasn't about healing, but about preparation for the most sacred transition of human existence. Tell me, Benjamin, said Simon, what really brings you here? What does your heart desire to understand about time? The old man settled into a chair, his eyes shining with the light of one who had found peace with his own mortality. I've lived 82 years on this earth, Simon. I've seen children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren born. I've worked since I was young, cared for my family, tried to be a righteous man. But now, at the end of the journey, I find myself thinking a lot about time." He paused, looking through the workshop window where golden leaves danced in the wind. "I'm not afraid of death, you understand. But I have a concern. How can I be sure that the time I lived had meaning? How can I know that when my personal clock stops, I will have used well each moment that was granted to me?" I whispered in Simon's heart the words that Benjamin needed to hear. Words that carried all the father's tenderness for his children who approached the heavenly home. "Benjamin," said Simon with a voice full of compassion, "your question reveals the beauty of a soul that lived with purpose. But let me share with you the greatest secret of the invisible clock. It doesn't measure the value of a life by the years lived, but by the love shared." The old man leaned forward, interested. "You see," Simon continued, "the world teaches that the value of time is measured by productivity, by achievements, by what we accumulate. But the invisible clock measures time in a completely different way. It counts every smile you gave to a frightened child, every word of encouragement you offered to a discouraged young person, every hug you gave to someone who needed to feel loved." Benjamin smiled, and tears of recognition appeared in his eyes. "So, the small things count too." "The small things count the most," Simon replied. "When you held your wife's hand during a storm, when you worked under the hot sun to support your family, when you stayed awake caring for a sick child, those moments weren't small in the invisible clock. They were enormous, eternal, precious." He placed my hands on Benjamin's shoulders, and immediately he felt an even deeper peace descending upon him. It was as if all anxiety about the value of his life was being dissolved by the divine recognition that he had been a faithful servant. "Benjamin," said Simon, following my inspiration, "when your time on this earth comes to an end, you will not be measured by men's clocks. You will be received by the eternal clock, which recorded every act of love, every silent sacrifice, every moment when you chose good instead of evil, love instead of selfishness." The old man closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "And my children? How can I teach them about this clock before I depart?" "Ah, this is the most beautiful question you could ask," Simon replied. "You will teach them not with words, but by example. When they remember you, they will recall not just the years you spent together, but the quality of the love you shared. That memory will be their invisible clock, forever marking the moments of true love." Benjamin opened his eyes, now shining with serene joy. "So when I depart, a part of the invisible clock will continue working through them." "Exactly," said Simon. "The invisible clock is eternal, Benjamin. It doesn't stop when our physical heart stops. In fact, that's when we discover it was always synchronized with the heart of the eternal, which never stops beating with love for his children." At that moment, all the clocks in the workshop began to play a soft and harmonious melody, as if they were celebrating Benjamin's well-lived life and preparing a lullaby for his weary soul. "May I give you advice for your last days on this earth?" asked Simon. Benjamin nodded. "Don't count the days that remain anymore. Instead, savor each moment as a precious gift. When your grandson runs into your arms, when your daughter brings you a cup of tea, when you hear the birds singing at dawn, these are the final tick-tocks of the invisible clock on this earth, preparing you for the eternal rest where there is no more time, only love." Benjamin rose slowly, but with dignity. "Thank you, Master Simon. I came here worried about the value of the time I lived, and I leave knowing that each moment was precious in the eyes of the Eternal." Before departing, he turned one last time. And when my clock stops definitively, Simon smiled with the same tenderness he had learned from me. When your clock stops, Benjamin, you will discover that it was only marking the time of preparation. The true clock, the eternal one, will just be beginning to play the melody of eternal life, where you will rest forever in the arms of love that never ends. And so, my dear soul, you too can rest now, knowing that each moment of your life is precious to me, and that true rest is already being prepared for you in the eternal time of my love. And so, my beloved weary soul, we come to the end of this sacred story, but not to the end of the journey we began together tonight. Just as Simon discovered the secret of the invisible clock, just as each person who crossed his workshop found healing for their temporal wounds, you too have discovered something precious in these moments we spent together. The invisible clock that lives within you didn't stop working during this story. In fact, it was synchronizing with my heart, finding the perfect rhythm of the peace that only I can give. Now, as your eyelids begin to grow heavy and your body prepares for the rest you so deserve, allow this divine clock to continue marking not the seconds of anxiety, but the moments of total trust in me. Always remember, my dear child, when the world around you speeds up too much, when life's clocks seem to run frantically, you have within you a special clock that marks the time of eternal love, a time where you are always enough, always loved, always cared for. Tonight, as you fall asleep, know that I continue watching over you, just as I watched over Simon, Martha, John, Anna, and Benjamin. The same love that transformed a simple clock repair shop into a sanctuary of healing is now enveloping you like a soft mantle, bringing the deep and restorative rest that your soul cries out for. Sleep in peace, knowing that the invisible clock within you will continue marking the beats of my love for you even while you rest. And when dawn breaks, you will awaken renewed, healed, and reminded that each new day is a precious gift marked not by the hands of time, but by the eternity of love that never ends. Good night, my dear sheep. Rest in the green pastures of my love.